She told me I was a liability, right after I'd signed the check for the $80,000 venue. My own daughter and her visionary husband thought the old builder was just a prop to be hidden behind the hydrangeas, a silent ATM in a rented suit. They forgot that a man who spends 40 years building foundations knows exactly how to identify a rot that goes down to the bone, and I was about to condemn the whole structure. If you're listening to this, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps to know someone else out there still values the truth. Let me tell you about the night my life collapsed. The tuxedo was a midnight blue straitjacket. It had a price tag of $3,000, more than I used to make in 2 months when I first started framing houses in the 80s. The receipt said Italian silk, but against my skin, it felt like cheap, suffocating plastic. It didn't breathe. It didn't move. It just held you in place, rigid and dishonest. I stood before the full-length mirror in the guest suite of the Grand Vestra Hotel. The room was too clean, smelling of lavender disinfectant and aggressive air conditioning. The man in the glass was a stranger. He looked uncomfortable, trapped in a costume that didn't fit the geometry of his life. I looked at my hands. They were the only things the suit couldn't hide. My fingers were thick, permanent monuments to 40 years of labor. The knuckles were swollen from arthritis, the skin textured like high-grit sandpaper. These were hands that gripped 20-ounce framing hammers, hauled pressure-treated lumber, and poured foundation walls. They knew the vibration of a reciprocating saw and the bite of cold steel in winter. Now they fumbled with a delicate strip of black silk. "Damn it," I whispered. My voice sounded too loud in the empty, sterile room. I wasn't Robert the Builder today. I wasn't the man who knew how to calculate the load-bearing capacity of a steel I-beam. Today I was a prop. I was the father of the bride. I pulled the knot tight. Too tight. It pressed against my windpipe, a subtle reminder that I was choking. Today was for Emily. I turned away from the mirror, unable to look at the imposter anymore. I walked to the window. My only daughter. The memories hit me, not as a montage, but as a heavy, singular weight. I remembered her sitting on my red metal toolbox, her legs swinging, handing me nails one by one. She used to smell like baby shampoo and sawdust. Now she was marrying Julian Thorne. The invitation called him a fintech visionary. I had looked him up. I read the articles. I saw the buzzwords: disruption, synergy, decentralized assets. But I've spent my life looking at blueprints. I know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition that holds nothing up. Julian was a partition. To me, he was a smile with too many teeth and eyes that never stayed still. He shook hands like he was afraid of catching a disease. But Emily looked at him like he was the sun, and I was just the old, crumbling earth she was trying to orbit away from. I checked my watch, a Rolex Submariner. I bought it for myself when I turned 50, a celebration of survival. It was heavy, durable, mechanical, a tool. It looked ridiculous, sliding out from the cuff of this rented masquerade. It was time. The venue was a sprawling estate on the cliffs of Newport, a place where the Gilded Age never really ended. It just got better security systems. Below us, the Atlantic Ocean churned, gray and angry, slamming against the rocks with a rhythm I felt in the soles of my shoes. The air smelled of salt spray, hydrangeas, and old money. I knew that smell. I had renovated mansions like this for 30 years. I knew the rot that often lived behind the wainscoting. I knew that the marble floors were often cold enough to numb your feet through your boots. I had built libraries for men who never read and nurseries for women who hired nannies. They never asked me to stay for dinner. I was the help, and today, standing at the top of the stone staircase, I still felt like the help. I walked out onto the terrace. It was a masterpiece of landscaping nature. Beaten into submission, thousands of white roses were strangled into perfect arches. A string quartet played something slow, sad, and expensive. It sounded like a funeral for my bank account. I took a deep breath, tasting the brine. I thought I was paying for a wedding. I didn't know I was buying my own heartbreak. I walked down the stone steps, careful not to scuff the patent leather shoes that pinched my toes. The guests were filtering in, a sea of pastel and charcoal. Men in Italian suits that cost more than my Ford F-250 stood in tight clusters. They held crystal tumblers of scotch, checking their phones every 30 seconds. Women in dresses that shimmered like liquid metal laughed with their heads thrown back, exposing long, elegant necks. I didn't recognize a soul. I saw a senator I recognized from the nightly news, shaking hands with a tech mogul who had just bought a professional sports team. A hedge fund manager was explaining a short squeeze to a man who looked like he owned a small country. I moved to the periphery. That's where structural columns belong. In the corners, holding things up, unseen, I stood near a massive marble pillar, wrapping my hand around the cold stone. It felt solid. It was the only thing here that felt real. I felt like a security guard, or worse, a trespasser in my own daughter's life. Then the crowd parted. I saw her, Emily. My breath hitched, a physical pain in my chest. She was breathtaking. Her dress was a custom design, a cloud of French lace that seemed to float around her, defying gravity. She didn't look like the girl who handed me nails. She looked like a princess from a storybook I couldn't afford to buy. She looked like her mother, God rest her soul. If Martha were here, she wouldn't be standing by a pillar. She would be right there, fixing Emily's train, crying, laughing, making friends with the senator. Martha had a light that could warm up even a room this cold. Without her, I was just a shadow. I felt a hard lump in my throat, jagged and dry. This was it, the moment every father works 20 years for. The handover. Emily was laughing. She was standing with Julian's mother, Beatrice. Beatrice was a terrifying woman, with hair like steel wool and eyes like chipped ice. She held a champagne flute like a weapon. Beatrice looked at me once across the lawn. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She looked at me with the polite, detached curiosity you give to a zoo animal that has wandered out of its enclosure. "How quaint," her eyes said. "The laborer is wearing a suit." I took a sip of my club soda. It was flat. It didn't matter. Emily was happy. That was the job. That was always the job. Construct the shelter, keep the storm out, let the family live inside. But as I watched her, the engineer in me noticed a stress fracture. Her laugh was a little too loud. Her hands were moving too fast. Her eyes were darting around the crowd, scanning, checking. She wasn't glowing with joy. She was vibrating with anxiety. She was hiding something. The crowd began to thin, moving like a tide toward the ballroom for the reception. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. I wanted to see her, just for a second, before the chaos of the speeches and the dancing. I wanted to tell her she was beautiful. I wanted to tell her I loved her. I stepped away from the safety of my pillar. "Emily," I called out. My voice was soft, swallowed by the wind and the chatter. But she heard it. She turned. For a microsecond, I saw my daughter. I saw the recognition. But then, her smile didn't just fade, it snapped off like a breaker switch. One moment, she was radiant. The next, she looked terrified. She abandoned her conversation with the senator's wife, mid-sentence. She didn't run to hug me. She rushed toward me with the urgency of a bomb disposal technician. She moved to intercept. She pushed me, physically guiding me behind a massive display of blue hydrangeas, out of the sightline of the VIPs. "Dad," she said. Her voice was tight, a violin string stretched to the breaking point. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I said, ignoring the weirdness of the moment. I reached out to take her hand. I wanted to squeeze her fingers, to anchor her. She pulled away. She recoiled, as if my skin was 60 grit sandpaper that would snag her silk. She stepped into my personal space, blocking my view of the party. Her perfume filled my nose, floral, expensive, and cold. She leaned up to my ear. Her breath was warm, but her words were ice. "Dad, get out of here," she whispered. I froze. The words didn't make sense. "What?" "I'm ashamed of you," she hissed. The venom in her voice was shocking. I swallowed hard, the taste of bile rising. Maybe she's right. A dark voice whispered in my head. Maybe I never belonged. Maybe I'm just the checkbook. "Look at you," she continued, her eyes scanning me with disdain. "You're standing there like a bodyguard. You're looming. Your hands. Look at your hands, Dad. They're scarred. You don't fit the image. Julian's investors are watching. The partners are here." "Emily," I whispered, my voice trembling, "I'm your father. I know, she said, and that was the cruelest part. She knew who I was, and that was exactly why she didn't want me there. She glanced over her shoulder, checking if anyone had seen the contamination. Right now, you're a liability. Just go, she begged, her eyes wet but not with love. Go the hotel room, or the parking lot. Just stay out of sight until the photos are done. Please, don't ruin this for me. I looked for my daughter in her eyes. I looked for the girl who cried when her goldfish died. I looked for the teenager who made me pancakes on Father's Day. She wasn't there. I saw a stranger wearing my daughter's face. A stranger who had traded her soul for an invitation to this cliffside masquerade. Go, she said again. She turned her back on me. She walked back to the light, back to the lamp. I stood in the shadows of the flowers, a ghost at the feast I had paid for. A waiter walked by with a silver tray of champagne. He looked at my face. He saw the devastation, the structural collapse of a man's heart. He looked away quickly, embarrassed by the raw grief. I didn't make a scene. A master builder doesn't scream when a structure is rotten. He condemns it. I turned and walked out. I walked past the valet stand where the boys in red vests were jogging to fetch Porsches and Bentleys. I didn't wait for my ticket. I saw the keyboard hanging on the wall. When the head valet turned to bow to a duchess, I reached over, grabbed my own keys from the hook, and kept walking. I walked to the far end of the lot, away from the luxury sedans. There she was, my truck, a pristine black Ford F-250 Super Duty. It was the only honest thing in this entire zip code. It was built to work. It didn't pretend to be anything else. I climbed in. The cab smelled of coffee, sawdust, and leather. It smelled like home. I put the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural growl that shook the frame. It was a sound I understood. I drove away. I watched the lights of the estate fade in the rearview mirror. But I didn't go to the hotel. I couldn't stand the silence of that expensive, lavender-scented room. I couldn't look at that tuxedo in the mirror again. I needed to breathe. I needed to be somewhere where the foundations were solid. I turned the truck toward the industrial district. I drove to the only place where the world made sense. My workshop. It was located in the industrial district, sandwiched between a sheet metal fabricator and a defunct textile mill. The building was ugly, corrugated metal rusted at the seams, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. To anyone else it looked like a scrapyard. To me, it looked like a cathedral. I unlocked at the heavy steel door. The hinges groaned, a sound I had been meaning to fix for 6 months but never got around to. I flipped a breaker. Banks of fluorescent lights flickered and hummed to life, bathing the concrete floor in a harsh, clinical buzz. The air inside was cold, stagnant, and perfect. It smelled of pine, sawdust, diesel fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the metallic tang of grinded steel. I breathed it in deep, purging the scent of the ocean, an expensive perfume from my lungs. I walked to the center of the room, past the stacked lumber, past the table saw that had taken the tip of my left index finger in 1998. I took off the tuxedo jacket. I didn't hang it up. I threw it onto a pile of scrap 2x4s. It landed in the dust, a blue puddle of wasted money. I loosened the tie, ripping the silk away from my throat. I unbuttoned the collar. I rolled up my sleeves. I walked to the utility sink in the corner to splash cold water on my face. As the water ran, I looked at my forearms under the unforgiving fluorescent light. Emily was right. They were ruined. My skin was a map of violence. There was a jagged white line running up my right wrist, 30 stitches from a shattered window pane on a renovation job in '04. There was a circular burn scar near my elbow from a welding spark. My knuckles were swollen knots of calcium and pain. I traced the scar on my wrist. That job paid for her braces. I looked at the burn. That job paid for her first car. I flexed my stiff fingers. The arthritis was the price of her tuition at that private university where she met Julian. I had sold my body, piece by piece, inch by inch, to build a platform for her to stand on. And tonight, she had looked down from that platform and told me I was too dirty to be seen. I turned off the water. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I sat on a stool at my drafting table, surrounded by blueprints for a new community center. I was bidding on I stared at the lines, clean, straight, logical, structural loads. Don't lie. Gravity doesn't betray you. If you build it right, it stands. If you cheat, it falls. People were the only unstable element. I sat there for 3 hours. I watched the dust motes dance in the light. I replayed the scene in the garden over and over. I'm ashamed of you. At 9:45 p.m., the silence was shattered. My phone buzzed on the workbench. The screen lit up. Emily, my heart jumped. It was a reflex I couldn't kill. The father in me surged forward, overriding the hurt man. She's sorry, I thought. She realized what she said. The stress got to her. She's calling to apologize. I picked it up. My hand was shaking. Hello? Dad? Her voice wasn't soft. It wasn't the voice of a daughter calling to make amends. It was breathless, shrill. It was the sound of a small animal caught in a trap. Dad, are you there? I'm here, I said, my voice flat. I'm at the shop. Why did you leave? She demanded. There was no hello, no I'm sorry, just an accusation. You told me to leave, Emily. You told me I was a liability. Forget that, she screamed. Jet, the audio clipped on the phone. God, why are you always so sensitive? Why do you have to make everything about you? I closed my eyes. What do you want, Emily? Listen to me. We have a crisis. A huge crisis. Did the cake collapse? I asked, looking at my watch. Did the band quit? No! Stop it! She was hyperventilating. It's the venue manager. He just pulled Julian aside. He pulled him off the dance floor. And he says there's an outstanding balance. Their May compliance fee and overages for the vintage wine service. They're saying we violated the contract limits. I frowned, leaning forward on the stool. The contractor in me woke up. I paid the venue in full, Emily, $80,000. I wrote the check 2 months ago. I have the receipt in my safe. I know, she yelled, her voice cracking. But this is extra. They're threatening to shut down the bar right now. They said they'll turn on the house lights and cut the music. Dad, the police are already outside. The police? My frown deepened. For a contract dispute on a Saturday night? The manager said he'll flag them down. He says it's theft of services. He's going to have Julian arrested in front of everyone. I stood up. I paced the concrete floor. Something was wrong. I've dealt with crooked inspectors and greedy suppliers my whole life. I know the smell of a shakedown, but this didn't fit. Traffic cops standing detail outside a wedding don't arrest grooms for wine bills. They tell you to settle it in civil court on Monday. How much, Emily? I asked. Send me $50,000. I stopped walking. The number hung in the dusty air. 50,000, I repeated slowly. For wine? Yes. And the fees. Dad, please. Julian is freaking out. He's in the bathroom throwing up. His partners are here. If the cops walk in, his reputation is destroyed. His IPO launches next week. He can't have a mugshot. Put the manager on the phone, I said, my voice hardening. I'll give him my credit card. I'll sort this out. No, she shouted too quickly. Why not? He won't take cards. Their system is down. He wants a wire transfer. A wire transfer at 10 o'clock at night? Banks are closed, Emily. Wires don't clear until Monday morning. Dad, stop asking questions. She was crying now, but it wasn't sadness. It was terror. Send it to Julian's account. I sent you the routing number. He has a way to move it to the venue instantly. Julian's account? I asked, the pieces clicking together in my mind, like a steel frame locking into place. Why not the venue's account? Because Julian has to pay them in crypto. Crypto? Yes, they're doing it under the table to save taxes. That's why it's cash or crypto. Dad, do you want me to be humiliated? Do you want my husband to go to jail on our wedding night? Do you want my husband to go to jail? The question echoed in the empty workshop. A contractor knows when a floor feels spongy. When you step on a joist and it gives just a fraction of an inch too much, it means the wood is rotten. It's the termites have eaten the heart out of the beam. This wasn't a wedding bill. This was panic. This was life or death. I need 20 minutes, I said. I have to access the secure business portal. My token is in the safe. You have 10, she snapped. Send it, or don't bother coming to Christmas. Don't bother calling me ever again. She hung up. I stared at the phone. The screen went black. I didn't open my banking app. I didn't go to the safe. I opened my laptop. It was a ruggedized Dell, built to survive job sites, covered in dust and stickers. I sat back down. The blue light of the screen illuminated my face. I am not just a man who swings a hammer. To survive in the construction industry in this city, you have to be half lawyer, half detective. You have to know who actually owns the land, who holds the lane, and who is lying their liquidity. I cracked my knuckles. I pulled up the state's public business registry. I typed in Ethereum Capital, Julian's visionary firm. Result, active. Registered agent address, a strip mall in Delaware. Mailbox 404. That wasn't illegal, but it was cheap. I dug deeper. I went to the county property records. Julian had been bragging about his flagship project, the Zenith, a luxury eco-condo complex downtown. The height of modern living, the brochure said. He had taken millions in pre-sale deposits. I pulled the permit filings for the Zenith address. Status stalled. There were 3 red flags on the file. Stop work order, issued 10/14. Violation, failure to pay subcontractors. Violation, structural instability. Foundation concrete grade insufficient. My eyes narrowed. Concrete grade insufficient. He had used cheap cement. He had watered down the mix to skim money off the top. He was building a skyscraper on sand. I checked the court records. A search for Julian Thorne lit up the screen like a Christmas tree. Lawsuit, breach of contract. Plumbing union. Lawsuit, fraud, investor group A.
Lian. Unpaid excavation services. He wasn't a visionary. He was a grifter. He was selling condos he couldn't build, taking deposits to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford, and paying off yesterday's debt with today's lies. And now, the money had run out. The Ponzi scheme had hit the wall.
The $50,000 wasn't for the venue. The venue was paid. The compliance fee was a lie. The crypto was the tell. You don't pay a caterer in crypto. You pay a blackmailer. Or a loan shark. I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight. Julian was in trouble. Deep trouble. The kind of trouble that doesn't end with a lawsuit. It ends with a shallow grave in the Pine Barrens. And he was dragging my daughter down with him. You idiot, I whispered to the empty room. You absolute fool. But then a darker realization hit me, a coldness that started in my stomach and spread to my fingers. Emily knew. She had to know. She knew about the wire transfer. She knew about the crypto. She was lying to me, her own father, to cover for him. She wasn't just a victim. She was an accomplice. She was willing to bleed my retirement dry to plug the hole in his sinking ship. I'm ashamed of you. The words took on a new meaning. She wasn't ashamed of my work. She was ashamed that she needed me. She was ashamed that after all her posturing about high society, she had to come crawling back to the man with the dirty hands to save her. I grabbed my leather jacket. The tuxedo shirt felt like it was strangling me again. I wasn't sending money. I wasn't going to throw $50,000 into a fire. I was going to find out who was holding the gun to my daughter's head. But first, I needed backup. I'm a builder, not a soldier. But I knew men who were. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Frank Miller. Frank used to run the docks before the unions cleaned up their act. Now he ran a private security firm that specialized in asset recovery and sensitive negotiations. Frank knew everyone in the city's underbelly. He knew the rats and he knew the snakes. Robert, Frank answered on the first ring. His voice sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. It's late. Shouldn't you be dancing the father-daughter waltz? I need a lick-up, Frank. You sound like you're at a funeral, not a wedding. I need a name. Vargas. The line went silent. The static hissed in my ear. Robert, Frank said, his voice dropping an octave. Why are you asking about Vargas? Because my son-in-law seems to owe him 50 grand tonight, and he needs to pay in crypto. Jesus, Frank breathed. Robert, Vargas isn't a vendor. He's not a bank.
Oh, is he? Eastern European Syndicate. Hard money. He runs the port logistics now. He lends to desperation cases. High interest, short terms. And if you don't pay, if your boy owes him 50 large, he's not paying for a wedding reception. He's paying for his kneecaps. Maybe his life. My blood turned cold. Where does Vargas operate? He has a club downtown, the Cobalt Room. But Robert, do not go there. You go there, you don't come out. I'm not going to the club. Then where are you going? I looked at the blueprint on my desk. I looked at the address of the stalled construction site. The Zenith. I'm going to the job site, I said. If Julian is desperate, that's where he'll hide the evidence. That's where the bodies are buried. Maybe literally. I'm sending a car, Frank said. Don't do anything stupid.
I'm just going to inspect the foundation, Frank. Robert, I hung up. I grabbed my keys. I walked to the tool rack. I bypassed the hammers. I reached for a heavy, solid steel crowbar. Cold iron, 36 inches of leverage. I weighed it in my hand. It felt balanced. I turned off the lights, plunging the workshop back into darkness. I walked out to my truck, the crowbar tight in my grip. I pulled out of the workshop lot, the gravel crunching loudly under my tires. The industrial district was a graveyard at night. Skeletal cranes stood against the moon, and the air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and cooling metal. I turned onto the main avenue, heading toward downtown. My hands were tight on the wheel at 10 and 2. My mind was a fever of calculations. Timelines, interest rates, flight paths, but my gut was cold. I glanced at the rearview mirror. 2 headlights. Xenon blue. Too bright, too close. I changed lanes. The lights followed. I slowed down to 10 miles under the limit. The car slowed with me. I sped up. It matched my pace. I had a tail. Julian, or worse, Vargas, had someone watching the Golden Goose. They wanted to make sure the man with the checkbook didn't get cold feet. Or maybe they were just waiting for the wire transfer to clear before they ran me off the road. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My truck was a 2021 F-250 Super Duty. It weighed 7,000 pounds. It was built for hauling steel beams and towing excavators. The sedan behind me was a sleek, black luxury car built for highway cruising and valet parking. You picked the wrong guy to follow, I muttered. I watched them in the mirror. They were amateurs, or they were arrogant. They were staying right in my blind spot, trying to intimidate me. I took a hard right, swerving into a narrow alleyway behind a row of warehouses. It was a tight squeeze, lined with dumpsters and fire escapes. The sedan followed, its suspension bottoming out on the uneven pavement. I slammed on the brakes. My truck screeched to a halt, the heavy tires biting into the grime. I threw the transmission into reverse. The backup camera lit up my dashboard screen, showing the terrified face of the driver behind me. I gunned the engine. The diesel engine roared, a terrifying mechanical scream in the narrow alley. My heavy steel bumper, reinforced for job sites, loomed over their low plastic hood. The driver of the sedan panicked. I saw him throw his hands up. He slammed his car into reverse, tires spinning smoke against the wet asphalt. He fishtailed, scraping the brick wall, desperate to get away from the crushing weight moving toward him. He backed out of the alley at high speed, clipped a dumpster, and sped away down the main road, disappearing into the night. I shifted back into drive. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. Amateurs, but dangerous amateurs. I checked the mirror again. Clear. I turned toward the riverfront, toward the lie Julian was building. The Zenith rose out of the mud like a bad idea. It was supposed to be a 20-story eco-luxury tower. In reality, it was 4 stories of rusted steel and gray concrete, surrounded by a chain-link fence that was already leaning. The site was dark, silent, and desolate. There were no security lights, no motion sensors, just the wind whistling through the naked girders. I pulled up to the service gate. A heavy padlock secured the chain. I didn't bother with the key. I grabbed the bolt cutters from my toolbox in the truck bed. I walked up to the gate, the mud sucking at my dress shoes. Shoes that cost $300 and were now ruined. I didn't care. Snip. The metal shorn with a sharp crack. The chain rattled to the ground. I pushed the gate open. It screamed on dry hinges. I walked into the site. The ground was a mess of puddles and debris. I saw piles of rebar left out in the rain. Rusting, I saw pallets of cement hardening in the bags. Millions of dollars of materials. Rotting. A contractor knows the feeling of a dead job site. It feels like a cemetery. The silence is heavy. It presses on your ears. I walked toward the side office, a double-wide trailer, sitting on cinder blocks near the unfinished foundation. The windows were dark, but the door was slightly ajar. I stepped onto the metal stairs of the trailer. I pulled a small, high-lumen flashlight from my pocket. I clicked it on, holding it away from my body. A trick Frank taught me. I pushed the door open. Inside, the office was a disaster zone. File cabinets were overturned. Papers were shredded and scattered across the cheap linoleum floor like confetti. A computer monitor was smashed on the ground. It looked like a panic room. I swept the light across the room. "Is anyone here?" I called out. My voice was low, commanding. A sob came from under the desk in the corner. I moved the light. A woman was huddled there, knees pulled to her chest, shaking violently. She was wearing a cocktail dress ruined by dust and tears. It was Sarah, Julian's executive assistant. I recognized her from the engagement party. She was the one who had excitedly shown me the mock-ups of the condos 6 months ago. "Sarah?" I lowered the light. "It's Robert, Emily's father." She looked up, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Mr. Robert?" she gasped. "Oh God. Oh God, did they send you?" "Nobody sent me," I said, holstering the light but keeping my hand near the crowbar in my belt. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" She crawled out from under the desk, trembling. "He told me to come here. He told me to destroy the files, the hard drives, the ledgers." "Julian?" She nodded frantically. "He said Vargas would kill us if I left anything. He said they were coming for the audit." "Where is he going, Sarah?" I asked. "Where is he taking my daughter?" She hesitated. She looked at the door. "Sarah," I said, my voice hard, "he left you here in the dark. To clean up his mess while dangerous men are looking for him. He doesn't care about you. Tell me." She pointed to the desk. "The blueprints." I walked over. Spread out on the desk was a set of plans for the penthouse. But someone had used the white space as a notepad. Scribbled in the corner in red permanent marker were frantic notes. Cayman Airways Flight 330, 6:00 a.m. Passports in safe. Transfer to BTC wallet Mixer, offshore. I stared at the red ink. He wasn't just running. He was vanishing. And he was taking Emily with him. At 6:00 a.m., my daughter would be on a plane to a life of fugitive exile. She would be an accessory to federal fraud. She would never see her home again. Did she know? The question haunted me. Did she know she was never coming back? "He took the hard drives," Sarah whispered. "He took the crypto keys. There's no money left, Mr. Robert. It's all gone. The investors, the pension funds. He spent it all." Suddenly, the gravel outside crunched. I clicked off my flashlight instantly. "Quiet," I hissed. I saw headlights sweep across the trailer window. A car had pulled into the site. Not my truck. Another one. "Stay down," I told Sarah. "Get back under the desk." I moved to the back of the trailer, ducking behind a heavy metal filing cabinet. I gripped the crowbar. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The trailer door creaked open. Heavy footsteps. 2 men. "Check the back." A voice rumbled. Deep, gravelly, Eastern European accent. "Place is tossed," a second voice said. Lighter, younger. Looks like the rat tried to scrub the cage. Beams of tactical flashlights cut through the darkness, slicing the dusty air. One beam swept over the desk where Sarah was hiding. She didn't make a sound. "Boss says, if the old man doesn't wire the cash by midnight, we break the groom's legs," the deep voice said. "Message needs to be sent." "If Sayer the girl?" asked the other. "Collateral," the first man replied. The word hung in the air, cold and transactional. "Vargas likes the wife. Says she's pretty. If the groom runs, we take her. She covers the debt." My hand tightened on the cold steel of the crowbar until my muscles cramped. Collateral? Emily wasn't just a participant. She was a shield. Julian was using her as a human buffer between him and the consequences of his greed. He knew Vargas would go after her. I was counting on it to buy him time. "Check the warehouse," the deep voice ordered. "If they aren't here, We hit the hotel, grabbed them before they cut the cake. The footsteps retreated. The door slammed shut. I waited 5 seconds. Then 10. I heard their car door close, but the engine didn't start. They were searching the site on foot. I moved to Sarah. "Stay here," I whispered. "Wait 10 minutes after I leave. Then call the police. Turn yourself in. It's the only way you stay safe." "Where are you going?" she whimpered. "I'm going to finish the job," I said. I slipped out the back emergency door of the trailer. It opened silently. The rain had started to fall, a cold drizzle that soaked my shirt instantly. I could see the flashlight beams of the 2 men near the foundation pit. 50 yards away, they were moving away from my truck. I sprinted. I moved with a speed I didn't know I still had. I reached the truck, opened the door, and slid inside. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't turn on the engine yet. I sat in the dark cab, breathing hard, the rain drumming on the roof. I had the truth. Julian was a fraud. Emily was in danger, but she was also complicit. She had chosen this man. She had chosen the lie. But she was still my daughter, and no one, not Vargas, not Julian, was going to take her as collateral. I pulled out my phone. The screen was bright in the darkness. I composed a text to Emily. "Transfer blocked by bank security. Flagged for fraud." I waited a beat. I let the panic set in on her end. Then I typed the solution. "I have cash. $50,000 in the safe at the shop. Meet me there. Bring Julian. Come alone. Don't tell the venue." I hit send. I stared at the screen. This was the point of no return. I wasn't saving her wedding. I was setting a trap. 3 dots appeared. "Okay, we're coming. Hurry." I started the engine. I left the headlights off until I hit the main road. I wasn't a father anymore. I was a structural engineer identifying a critical failure, and tonight I was going to bring the whole house down. I drove back to the workshop in silence. The rain had turned into a deluge, hammering the roof of the truck like handfuls of gravel. The windshield wipers slashed back and forth, a metronome counting down the remaining minutes of my daughter's freedom. I pulled the truck inside the bay door and hit the button to close it. The heavy steel door rattled down, shutting out the storm, shutting out the world. I was alone. I had work to do. I wasn't just a father tonight. I was a stage manager setting up the final act of a tragedy. I moved the heavy machinery. I fired up the propane forklift, the engine coughing blue smoke. I shifted pallets of sheetrock and stacks of pressure-treated lumber, creating a narrow, claustrophobic corridor leading to the center of the shop floor. I wanted to control their movement. I wanted them to feel squeezed. I killed the overhead fluorescents. The hum died away, leaving a ringing silence. I clamped a single halogen work lamp onto a steel beam high above the central drafting table. I clicked it on. A harsh yellow cone of light cut through the gloom, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air. It looked like an interrogation room. I stood in the light for a moment. It was hot, unforgiving. I went to the back office. I unlocked the filing cabinet, pulled out an old canvas duffel bag I used for gym clothes. It smelled of sweat and mildew, fitting for dirty money. I found a stack of old newspapers in the recycling bin. The Providence Journal, dated 3 years ago. Old news, forgotten stories. I took my utility knife from my belt. I sat at the desk and began to cut. Slice. 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 The sound was rhythmic. I cut the paper into the exact dimensions of U.S. currency. I made stack after stack. My hands, usually so careful with measurements, worked with a grim mechanical speed. I reached into my wallet and pulled out 2 crisp $100 bills. Emergency cash I always carried. I placed 1 real bill on top of the first stack and 1 on the second. I packed the stacks into the duffel bag. It looked full. It looked heavy. It looked like salvation. I zipped it shut. The zipper hissed like a snake. I walked out to the shop floor and placed the bag directly in the center of the spotlight on the drafting table. It sat there, a black hole of greed, waiting to be claimed. I didn't stand next to it. I retreated into the shadows. I found a stack of drywall in the darkest corner, behind the bandsaw. I sat down. I rested the crowbar against my knee. The silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was predatory. I checked my watch. 11:15 p.m. I thought about Emily. I thought about the little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee. I remembered how she would run to me, trusting that I could fix anything. Daddy, fix it. I closed my eyes. I am fixing, I told myself. This is the only way to fix it. But the guilt was a physical weight in my gut. I was about to destroy her life to save her from herself. I was about to become the villain in her story so she wouldn't become a victim in Julian's 11:30 p.m. Tires screeched on the wet asphalt outside. A car door slammed. Then another. "This is it," a male voice shouted, muffled by the steel walls. "Open the door." I stayed in the shadows. I didn't move. The small pedestrian door to the workshop flew open, banging against the metal wall. Julian and Emily burst in. They looked like refugees from a destroyed kingdom. The contrast was jarring. Julian's tuxedo was soaked, the bow tie undone, his hair plastered to his skull. His eyes were wild, darting around the room, pupils dilated with adrenaline and cocaine. And Emily, my heart broke all over again. Her dress, that $3,000 cloud of lace, was ruined. The hem was black with mud and grease. She was shivering violently, her arms wrapped around herself. Her makeup was smeared, turning her face into a tragic mask. "Dad," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Dad, where are you?" "I'm here," I said. My voice was calm, low. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I stepped out of the shadows, stopping at the edge of the darkness. I didn't enter the cone of light. I let them stand in the spotlight while I remained the invisible man. "Thank God," Julian gasped. He didn't look at me. He looked past me. He saw the bag on the table. His eyes lit up with a hunger that was disgusting to witness. It was the look of an addict seeing a needle. "Is this it? Is this the cash?" He rushed toward the table. "Stop," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The command hit him like a physical blow. He froze, his hand inches from the zipper. "We don't have time for this. Robert." Julian yelled, spinning to face me. "Give me the bag. The venue." "There is no venue, Bill, Julian," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. The rain drummed on the roof, a distant thunder. "What?" Julian blinked, a drop of water falling from his nose. "Of course there is. You don't understand how these corporate contracts work." "I understand concrete," I interrupted. "I understand load-bearing walls. And I understand fraud." I took a step forward. "I know about the stop work orders at the Zenith. Julian, I know about the unpaid subcontractors. I know about the fake concrete tests." Julian's face went pale. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving only fear. "I know about Vargas," I continued, twisting the knife. "And I know about Flight 304 to the Caymans at 6 a.m. Emily gasped. It was a sharp intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. She turned to Julian. Her face was white. "You said nobody knew about the flight," she whispered. "Shut up, Emily," Julian snapped. The mask fell off completely. The charming, visionary son-in-law was gone. The rat was exposed. He turned back to me, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "Look, old man, you don't understand finance. This is leverage. This is just a liquidity crunch. It happens to every visionary." "It's not liquidity," I said. "It's theft. I'll fix it. I just need the bridge loan. Once the IPO hits..." "It's not a loan," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It's extortion. You owe a loan shark 50 grand, and you're using my daughter as bait." "But she's my wife." Julian spat. He grabbed Emily's arm, roughly. His fingers dug into her flesh. "She enjoys the lifestyle. Don't you, Em? She likes the dresses. She likes the parties. She likes the idea of being a power couple." He shook her. Tell him you knew what you were signing up for." I looked at Emily. She was trembling, her eyes wide and wet. "Did you?" I asked. "Did you know he was a criminal, Emily?" She stammered. She looked at the floor. "Dad, I didn't know it was legal. I just thought..." "Surely you can help us." She looked up at me, pleading. "You have so much money sitting in your retirement account. You have the equity in the business. Just give it to us. We'll go away. We'll start over. You'll never have to be ashamed of us again." Ashamed of us. The irony was a knife in my gut. She was ashamed of my honest work, my calloused hands, my truck, but she was begging for my honest money to cover his crimes. She wanted the fruit of my labor to pay for her illusion. Give me the bag, Julian demanded, his voice dropping. He reached into his waistband. He pulled out a gun. It was a small, silver pistol, a .22 caliber. It looked like a toy in his shaking hand. Julian, no, Emily screamed, pulling away from him. Shut up. Julian roared. He was sweating profusely now. He's not going to give it to us. He wants to see me fail. He's always hated me. He aimed the gun at my chest. The barrel wavered. Hand it over, Robert. I'm not asking any more. I looked at the gun. I looked at the man holding it. I didn't flinch. I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. I had faced bigger dangers than this. I had walked beams, 50 stories up in the wind. I had seen cables snap. This was just another hazard. You won't shoot, I said softly. Try me, Julian yelled. His finger tightened on the trigger. You've never held a tool in your life, Julian. You don't know the weight of it.
If you shoot me, you leave a body.
Vargas will find you before you make the airport. A murder investigation closes the ports. I don't care. I'm not going to prison. He cocked the hammer. Click. The mechanical sound echoed in the metal room like a gavel strike. This was it, the moment of truth. I looked at Emily. She was standing between us, paralyzed. Emily, I said, walk away from him. Come stand behind me. She froze. She looked at Julian, the man who offered her status, the man who promised her a world of gold, even if it was painted. She looked at me, the man in the cheap suit, the man she was ashamed of, the man who was currently being held at gunpoint for her sake. Emily, get over here, Julian growled, keeping the gun trained on me. Grab the bag. We're leaving. She hesitated. Her eyes darted back and forth. The silence stretched, agonizing and thick. Choose, I thought. Please, baby girl, choose the truth. Then she moved. She didn't step toward me. She stepped toward the table. She stepped toward the bag. She chose him. She chose the lie. She chose the shame. She decided that a life on the run with a criminal was better than a life of honesty with a builder. I closed my eyes. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. But as the wave receded, it left something behind. Clarity. Absolute. Diamond-hard clarity. Take it, I said. My voice was dead. Emily grabbed the handle of the duffel bag. She looked at me one last time. There were tears in her eyes, but her jaw was set. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. But we have to. Go, I said. They turned and ran toward the door, clutching the bag of newspaper clippings like it was the Holy Grail. We did it, Julian yelled, manic laughter bubbling up. We're rich, baby. They reached the threshold. Whoop, whoop. The sound was deafening. It wasn't a noise, it was a concussion. Floodlights from the rooftops of the adjacent buildings slammed on, turning the rainy night into blinding white day. Federal agents, drop the weapon, drop the bag. The workshop yards swarmed. SWAT teams in heavy tactical gear poured over the fences. Red laser dots danced across Julian's chest and Emily's dress. Julian froze. He looked at the lights, blinded. Drop it. He dropped the gun. It clattered on the wet concrete. He dropped the bag. It hit the ground with a heavy thud. Emily screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror. She fell to her knees in the mud, ruining the dress completely. I walked out of the workshop. I walked slowly, my hands visible. Frank Miller stepped out from behind a police cruiser, flanked by men in FBI windbreakers. 2 agents tackled Julian, slamming his face into a puddle. He was screaming about his rights. Another agent moved toward Emily. He grabbed her wrists. He pulled them behind her back. I heard the click of the handcuffs. Dad, she screamed. She twisted her head, searching for me in the blinding light. Dad, help me. I'm your daughter. They reached out her hand. The hand that had pushed me away in the garden. The hand that had grabbed the bag. I'm ashamed. I'm sorry. Dad, please. Fix it. I walked up to the police line. I stood 5 feet away from her. I looked down into her streaming eyes, streaked with mascara and rain. I believe you, I said. She blinked, hope flickering in her gaze. What? I believe you, I repeated. You told me I was a simple laborer. You told me I didn't understand your world. I looked at the FBI agents, then back at her. You were right. I am just a builder, and builders can't stop the FBI. No, she whispered. Daddy, please. I believe you, I said, my voice cracking for the first time. So I'm letting you live in the world you chose. I stepped back. I nodded to Frank. Take them, I said. No, Daddy, no. Her screams tore through the night. Louder than the sirens, louder than the storm. I watched as they shoved Julian into the back of a cruiser. I watched as they guided Emily, weeping and stumbling, into another. I watched the taillights disappear down the road, fading into the red blur of the rain. The workshop was quiet again. The floodlights clicked off. I was alone in the dark. The flashing lights faded into the distance, leaving spots of purple dancing in my vision. The sirens wailed a mournful harmony that drifted away toward the city center, taking my heart with them. I stood in the mud outside the workshop. The rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling of wet ozone and exhaust. Frank walked over to me. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, a solid, heavy presence. He lit a cigarette, the flame of his Zippo illuminating the deep lines in his face. He offered me one. I took it, even though I had quit 10 years ago. The feds have the bag, Frank said quietly, exhaling a plume of smoke. They opened it, saw the newspaper clippings. The lead agent actually laughed, said it was the boldest sting he's seen in a decade. I didn't laugh. I stared at the spot where Emily had fallen to her knees. The mud was still disturbed there, a chaotic imprint of her desperation. She's gone, Frank, I whispered. She's alive, Robert, Frank said, putting a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, like a clamp. Vargas won't touch her in federal custody. You saved her life. I sent her to prison. You sent her to a timeout, Frank corrected. Better she sits in a cell for wire fraud than ends up in a barrel at the bottom of the harbor for owing the mob. You did the math. It was the only way the numbers worked. I nodded slowly. The engineer in me knew he was right. The structural load was too high. The collapse was inevitable. I had just controlled the demolition. But the father in me was screaming. The father in me wanted to run after the police cars, to bang on the windows, to trade places with her. Go home, Robert, Frank said gently. My guys will lock up. We'll handle the statement with the bureau in the morning. Go home. I walked back into the office. The silence was deafening now. The hum of the refrigerator, the drip of a pipe, sounds I usually ignored, sounded like gunshots. I sat at my desk. The single halogen lamp was still burning, casting long, sharp shadows. I picked up the blueprint for the community center. St. Jude's Home for Boys. It was a pro bono project I had been toying with, a place for kids who had nothing, kids who didn't have fathers to buy them $3,000 dresses or pay for their mistakes. I looked at the phone. It was midnight. I dialed. Hello? The voice was groggy, thick with sleep. Mr. Henderson, I said. It's Robert. Robert? Is everything all right? It's good Lord, it's midnight. Did the wedding go late? The wedding is over, I said. In every sense. I listened to the rustle of sheets on the other end. Henderson was sitting up, his lawyer instincts waking up. What happened? I need to make a change to my estate planning. Immediately. Robert, we can discuss this on Monday. No, I said. My voice was granite. I want it noted now. Tonight. Okay, Henderson said, his tone shifting to professional alertness. Go ahead. The trust fund for Emily. The inheritance. The property deeds. All of it. Yes? Revoke it. There was a long pause. Revoke all of it? Robert, that's millions of dollars. She's your only child. She made her choice, I said, staring at the empty duffel bag the feds had left behind as evidence. She chose a world of shortcuts. She chose a world where money matters more than loyalty. I won't fund that world anymore. So, who is the beneficiary? I looked at the blueprint. I traced the lines of the gymnasium, the library, the workshop I had designed for the kids. The St. Jude's Home for Boys, I said. And specifically, I want an endowment for a trade school program. Carpentry, welding, masonry. A trade school, Henderson repeated. Yes, I want to give money to people who are willing to get their hands dirty. People who want to build something real. And Emily, Henderson asked softly, what if she calls? What if, when she gets out, she needs help? I closed my eyes. I saw her face in the rain. I'm ashamed of you. If she calls, I said, my voice trembling slightly, tell her that her father was just a simple builder, and he built exactly what she asked for. I don't understand. She wanted a life without me, I said. She has it. I hung up. I walked out to my truck. The F-250 sat in the rain, a beast of burden. I climbed in. The leather seat was cold. I gripped the steering wheel. Flashbacks hit me in waves. I saw Emily at 16, sitting in the passenger seat of this very truck, or the one before it, gripping the wheel with white knuckles. I can't do it, Dad. It's too big. You can, I told her. Just feel the weight. Respect the machine. Don't fight it. Guide it. She had smiled when she finally parked it straight. She had looked at me like I was a hero. I wiped a hand across my eyes. That girl was gone. She had been replaced by a woman who looked at my hands with disgust. I had started the engine. The diesel rumble was a comfort. I drove out of the industrial park, leaving the scene of the crime behind. I drove through the city. I passed the high-rise condos that Julian had promised to build. They were dark, skeletal, unfinished. Monuments to ego. I drove toward the suburbs, to the house I built with my own hands 30 years ago. My driveway was steep. I paved it myself in '95. It was still perfect. No cracks. I parked the truck. I walked up the path. The motion sensor light clicked on, flooding the porch with warmth. I unlocked the front door. The house smelled of lemon polish. And quiet. It was a modest house. Solid oak floors. Crown molding that fit perfectly in the corners. A fireplace made of river stone I had hauled from the creek myself. It wasn't a mansion on a cliff. It didn't smell of old money. It smelled of work. I walked into the living room. The tuxedo jacket was still in the truck. I stripped off the shirt. I took off the undershirt. I walked to the kitchen sink, the deep farmhouse sink I installed for Martha, because she loved canning vegetables. I turned on the hot water. I grabbed the bar of pumice soap. I scrubbed. I scrubbed my hands until the skin was red and raw. I scrubbed away the feeling of the silk tie. I scrubbed away the grease of the workshop. I scrubbed away the memory of Julian's gun and Emily's betrayal. I looked at my hands under the light. They were old. They were scarred. They were trembling. But they were clean. I walked down the hall to the bedroom. I passed the wall of photos. Emily at graduation. Emily at prom. Emily and me at the beach. I didn't take them down. I didn't turn them over. You can't erase the past just because the future is broken. Those moments were real, even if the person in them had changed. I sat on the edge of my bed. The mattress groaned familiar and welcoming. I was alone. I would likely be alone for the rest of my life. The silence of the house settled around me. For the first time in months, maybe years, the anxiety was gone. There was no more worrying about the wedding. No more worrying about Julian's vague business deals. No more wondering why my daughter wouldn't look me in the eye. The worst had happened. The structure had failed. The roof had caved in. But I was still standing. I lay back against the pillow. I stared at the ceiling. I knew where every joist was. I knew the spacing of the rafters. I knew this house would hold against the wind. I had lost a daughter. The pain of that would never fully heal. It would be a hairline fracture in my heart forever. But I had kept my dignity. I had refused to be an accessory to a lie. I had refused to let them turn me into a fool. In a world built on sand, on crypto, on image, on appearances, dignity is the only foundation that holds. I closed my eyes. The rain tapped gently against the window pane. A lullaby. I slept for the first time in years. I slept without dreaming. I woke at 5:00 a.m. My internal clock didn't care about tragedy. It only cared about the sunrise. For a brief, merciful second, I didn't remember. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me, rhythmic and hypnotic. Then the events of the night rushed back in, a landslide of memories burying me alive. The tuxedo, the gun, the rain, the handcuffs. I sat up. My body ached. Not the good ache of a hard day's labor, but the deep, marrow-level ache of emotional trauma. I walked to the kitchen. The house was cold. I made coffee, black, strong, the ritual of grinding the beans, pouring the water, listening to the drip. It grounded me. I turned on the small television on the counter. The local news was on. Breaking. Visionary developer arrested in dramatic FBI raid. There was grainy footage of Julian being shoved into a federal vehicle. He looked small, pathetic. And then, a clip of Emily. It was blurry, taken from a distance, but in her posture. She was slumped over, her face hidden by her hair. Emily Thorne, daughter of local contractor Robert Evans, was also taken into custody on charges of conspiracy and wire fraud. Daughter of local contractor Robert Evans. Even in her downfall, my name was the foundation she stood on. I turned the TV off. The silence rushed back in. I walked into the living room. The sun was coming up, painting the room in pale grays. I saw a photo frame on the mantel that I had missed last night. It was from her 10th birthday. I had built her a treehouse, a masterpiece of cedar and pressure-treated pine. It had a working drawbridge. I remembered that day. She had climbed up to the highest platform, looked down at me, and shouted, "Look, Daddy, I'm the queen of the world." "Be careful, Em," I had shouted back. "Don't lean too far." "I'm fine," she had laughed. "You built it. It won't break." She had trusted my work then. She believed that anything I built would hold her. And she was right. The tree house stood for 15 years, until the new owners tore it down. The failure wasn't in the wood. It was in the world she wanted to rule. At 8:00 a.m., my phone rang. It wasn't Emily. It was a public defender, a court-appointed lawyer. "Mr. Evans?" The voice was young, harried. "I'm representing your daughter for the arraignment this morning." "Okay," I said. She's in a bad way, sir. She's been asking for you. She's requesting that you post bail. The judge set it at $100,000 given the flight risk. $100,000. I had it. It was in the retirement fund. It was the money I had saved for my old age. The money that was supposed to pay for trips I'd never take with a wife who was already gone. I looked at my hands. I looked at the coffee cup. "Mr. Evans?" "I can't do that," I said. "Sir, she's terrified. She's never been inside a facility like this. If you don't post bail, she stays in county until the trial. That could be months." "I know," I said. My voice was steady, but my hand gripped the counter so hard the knuckles turned white. She needs to see the reality of it. She needs to understand that actions have weight. You can't just float away from them. "She's your daughter?" the lawyer pressed. "That's exactly why," I said. "I spent her whole life catching her when she fell. I can't catch her this time. She has to hit the ground. It's the only way she'll learn to stand up." "Is there a message?" he asked, his voice cooling. "Tell her—" I paused, choking back the lump in my throat. "Tell her I love her."
"And tell her I'll be there when she gets out."
But not a minute before I hung up. I sank onto a kitchen chair and wept. I cried for 5 minutes. Ugly, heaving sobs. Then I stopped. I wiped my face with a paper towel. I stood up. I couldn't stay in the house. The ghosts were too loud. I went out to the truck. I didn't go to the workshop. I drove to the north side of town, to the site of the new community center. It was Sunday. No crew. Just the skeleton of the building rising from the dirt. I unlocked the gate. I walked onto the site. The smell of wet earth and curing concrete filled my lungs. It was better than oxygen. It was truth. I walked to the south wall. We were pouring the bond beam on Monday. I checked the rebar. I saw a tie that was loose, a sloppy twist of wire. I knelt down in the mud. I pulled my pliers from my belt. I always wore them, even on Sundays. I grabbed the wire. I twisted it, tight, secure. Click. I moved to the next one. Loose. I fixed it. I moved down the line. I worked for hours. I lost track of time. The sun beat down on my neck. My back ached. My knees popped. But the wall was getting stronger. Every twist of the wire was a small act of order in a chaotic world. Around noon, a truck pulled up. It was a beat-up Chevy. A kid hopped out. Mateo. He was 19. He was one of the kids from the neighborhood who I'd hired as an apprentice last month. He walked up to the fence, looking surprised to see me. "Boss," he called out, "it's Sunday. You okay?" He looked at my clothes. My jeans were stained with mud, my shirt soaked with sweat. He didn't know about the FBI. He didn't know about the heartbreak. He just saw the builder. "I'm fine, Mateo," I said, standing up and wiping my forehead. "Just checking the steel." "You want me to help?" he asked, eager. "I ain't got nothing to do today." I looked at him. He had nothing. He lived in a 2-room apartment with 6 siblings, but he showed up early every day. He asked questions. He wanted to learn how to pour concrete so it wouldn't crack. He respected the trade. "Yeah," I said. "Come on in. Grab a pair of pliers." Mateo grinned and vaulted the fence. I watched him walk toward me. I thought about the new wheel. I thought about the trade school endowment. Emily had chosen the quicksand, but there were others like Mateo who were looking for solid ground. "Show me what you did wrong here," I said, pointing to a section of rebar. Mateo looked at it, squinting. "Spacing is off? Too wide?" "Exactly," I said. "If the spacing is wide, the concrete is weak. It looks fine on the outside, but the first time the ground shifts, it snaps. Like a fake watch," Mateo joked. I smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it was real. "Yeah, Mateo, just like a fake watch." I patted him on the shoulder. "Let's fix it," I said. We went to work. The sound of metal clicking against metal filled the air. It was a good sound. I'd lost my family, but I still had my hands. I still had the work, and as long as I could build, I could survive. I picked up the next piece of steel. I measured it. I set it in place. I began